Hey everyone, let's talk about why we start with the capital O and the capital H when we're starting our alphabets. At first glance, it doesn't seem like the capital O or H stand out amongst its peers. But when you break the letter forms down, they have a lot of DNA that translates to the other letter forms. First, when we look at the upright strokes of the capital H and where it appears out throughout the alphabet, you can see how many times we're going to reuse that shape. The same is true when we look at the crossbar. When we add the crossbar in, we get to see all the other horizontal strokes that come throughout the alphabet. Then, when we look at the capital O, you can see all the curves that show up in the alphabet. And now that we've drawn those three things, the upright, the horizontal, and the curves, we have this really beautiful set and this really large proportion of our alphabet finished. In fact, it's almost 75% of the way done once we've already drawn those three shapes. After that, we have to work through the difficult characters like the capital and lowercase s, but we just bring in a slant or a slash or our diagonal pieces, and it gives us the rest of those other letter forms or the bits of those letter forms like the capital A, V, W, X, and K. But it's helpful when we build out the rest of the alphabet first so that we have a comparison or a baseline when we're drawing these other characters. They get really weird, so we're going to build up from there. So let's move over to glyphs and put this to work. Now, a fair note, I went in and I adjusted my ASDF measuring stick a little bit because the proportions of noto sans were a lot larger than what I want this typeface to be. So feel free to go back and adjust it. Normally this happens in the design process, but I'm trying to make this efficient for you, so I did it off screen. I'm going to start by opening up my capital H. And I'm going to make sure I'm on my sans serif layer because that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to go and add my component, and already I've typed in ASDF. This is a search here, so if I had other letter forms I wanted to reference, I could do that. But with my ASDF, I just have it there so I can quick type it in. I have my uppercase and my lowercase measurement. Now I'm just going to draw in a quick rectangle here. I'm just going to touch it to the cap height and that baseline. And then with my selection tool, I'm going to pull it in until it matches the width of my measuring stick. So I've got it here and here, and it's ready to go. I'll move this over, and holding Option, I'll drag and I'll pull in another one, and that's looking good already. Then I'll go and I'll draw my crossbar of my H. Again, I'm going to match it to this guide that I've brought in, and after that, I'm done with the guide. So I've chosen to design a high contrast typeface. That way, when we move into the sans serif and the serif version, particularly the serif version, we can look at how it's going to affect and how we use an axis in that. So this is my H. I think it needs to be just a little bit wider. It's sturdy, it needs to stand strong, especially with these high contrasting forms. And then I'm going to select everything and I'll paste it into my serif version. Now I've got my layers turned on, so you can see over here I can see an outline of what my sans serif is looking like. If I turn that eyeball off and give glyphs a second to reload, you'll see that layer turn off. So if you do want to see it, you can keep that layer turned on. If you don't want to see it, you can turn it off. For me, I really like to look at it and see what's going on. It's not too confusing for me. So in this version, this is the serif version. We're going to add serifs. There are a number of ways to do this. You could get really complex and use corner components or use components like we had talked about in the past. We probably will eventually use components, but for now, I'm going to illustrate what some simple serifs might look like. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this down, and then I'm going to go and get my pen tool. For speed's sake, I'm going to make these really simple serifs. They're going to be pretty square, and then I'm going to do a little indent here just to imagine that you had some nice humanistic curves through there. But for us, I'm just going to make sure this is all the same out. So let's go Shift 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That seems good. and I'll do it this time so you don't have to hear me count. If you heard the clicking on my keyboard, hopefully I sounded pretty good. And already this is looking like some weird serif H. We'll narrow it down just a little bit, and I'm going to make these a little bit thicker, so I'll pull this down just a touch, and something like that is going to look like a pretty good serif. Now right away, I can make a component from selection. You can see that here in my option tool. So I'll choose to make a component, and I'll name it like we did in our demo, serif. Then back in our file over here, I'm going to duplicate it, because in the H, there's nothing too different between all these serifs. I hope that you're enjoying the video so far. This is a mid-roll just to ask, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, as that's the best way to support the videos on this channel. If you already have subscribed, be sure to like the video and comment or tag somebody who might benefit from them. Now, back to our regular programming. There are letter forms where the serifs are vastly different, and when we come to those letter forms, we'll talk about the differences in those serifs and why they look different. But for our capital H, they're really symmetrical. It's a very symmetrical letter. It's really balanced, and just like that, you can see that we have our capital H. With our capital H done, we'll move on to our capital O. So I'll double click to bring that in. And the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to draw a circle. Now you can hold shift to draw a perfect circle if you want. You don't have to, you can sort of wedge it out. I'm going to start with it sort of wedged out, but based off the way I drew my H, I'm going to have a really wide O, I think. So we'll start with that. I'll center him up. I'm going to copy and paste him back in, so I should have a second one now. And if I drag and hold that corner, I'm going to hold shift and option to bring it to the center. I've got now two paths, but remember, we talked about why this isn't showing up right. It's because our paths aren't correct. So if I select all, do path, it will correct that path direction, and now I've got a cutout. Already, it might be helpful to start looking at this in relationship to our H. So I'm going to go up to our text tool here, put my cursor here, and type capital H and capital H. I'm going to say, sure, he's a pretty good width, so I'm going to go back to my editing tool. And we'll bring in that component. Remember, we've used this before, and we're going to start making sure we're getting to our width. So I didn't quite nail that. I came close. This is that little outdent there is how thick I want my curves to be. And then, because this is a contrasting font, we're going to stretch this guy. And I'm going to hold option, and you'll see it stretch at the top and the bottom. And we'll bring it all the way down there to the bottom. Now, it's off to a good start, but it is looking kind of crazy. It's mostly a perfectly stretched circle, and we want it to look like a perfectly good O. So to do that, we're going to grab these handles and these handles, and I'm going to bump out those shoulders a little bit. I'll do the same on this side. I'll grab these handles and these handles, and bump out that shoulder a little bit. And you can see down the preview how good this is already looking. When I tap back and forth, I can decide if I want more weight through here. So now I'm going to look at the transition from the thicks to the thins. In our H, we don't have to worry about that. We just have a stem that's straight and a stem that's straight. But in our curve shape, we have to really pay attention to how this is transitioning from one weight to the next. I prefer in a capital O to have it sit down a little bit more. So I'm going to widen this out just a little bit. So I'm grabbing those handles and just arrow keying over, just so it has a little bit more weight on that bottom, so I would know that that's an up and a down. Right? If we turn this O upside down, he might look a little out of place. Now, I've drawn this O to have a perfectly vertical axis, straight up and down. If I were drawing this to have an angled axis, this point would come over here a bit, this one would come over there, this guy would go up, and this one would go down. And then we'd work to adjust those through this letter form. I'm not interested in that, and I think it'll slow us down in our work together. So I'm just going to copy this sans serif version, and lucky for us, the serif version of an O is the same thing. So just like that, we have our H and our O in our serif and our sans serif versions. If I go to my text tool here, we can click between the two. I'd say that's a pretty good start to an alphabet. In the next video, we'll talk about the lowercase o and the lowercase n.
Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you were able to gain something along the way, even if it's just a hotkey or how to move some points around that is different than what you may have otherwise known. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos coming out every single week, and comment or tag or share it with some other designers who you think would design some awesome fonts.